spaghetti squash chicken primavera casserole. Instead of stuffing it in a spaghetti squash, we're making it all into one casserole. It's a great way to enjoy the squash, but even better, it's delicious and hearty. Let's make some. This is a chicken primavera casserole using spaghetti squash. So instead of using pasta, we're gonna use one of the season's and I think winter's best treats, which is spaghetti squash. So you pick this in the fall, it lasts through the winter, and spaghetti squash is great because it can take on so many flavors. It's a neutral flavor. It's not like butternut squash, but what it is, once it roasts, it has these noodle-like insides that you scrape out, and they're really good. You just have to know how to use them in the right way. So to start, what we're gonna do is get our squash ready. I think a lot of times you see this in a grocery store and you think, well, that looks annoying. I'm not gonna deal with this. It isn't annoying. It's actually really simple to use. So they can sometimes be hard to cut, or sometimes they're not too bad. But you just have to have a good sharp knife, and sometimes you might find one like this. See how this has a little bit of brown in it? What we're gonna do is open it up. Don't be scared of things like that. I think some people instantly think, oh, if you see anything that looks bad or rotten, what does that mean? All that means is, look, here at the top, it was just starting to go a little brown. That's not bad. Just scrape that part out, and then we're gonna keep going with our roasting. I think things like this are important to know in the kitchen. When something has a bad spot, like a squash, you can cut it out and still use it. You don't have to throw the whole thing out. So what we're gonna do though here is scrape out these insides, which are the seeds and the pith. And that's just like any squash. So I like to use a grapefruit spoon. I think these work great because those little tines just kind of grab onto all these little things. See how that just scrapes it out? And as you're going around, you just wanna make sure to get somewhat all the pith and those seeds, and we'll put those right into our compost, or if you have chickens, they'll work great because the chickens will love it. So once you get them all scraped out, look how clean and different they look. And this is pretty much for every squash, but look how beautiful that is. When we have all of ours done, I'm just gonna put them on a parchment lined baking sheet. Now, I like to bake them this cut side down, but first what I like to do is get olive oil on them, some salt and pepper, and I'm gonna actually, in this case, roast chicken with them as well. You know, I like to do as simple process as I can here. And the thing is, the chicken's gonna cook quicker than these squash will, but just check it and take the chicken out. Why have a whole separate pan? Instead, let's just put the chicken on. We're gonna olive oil the whole thing, salt, pepper the whole thing, roast it all together, pull the chicken out when it's done. It's super simple. So olive oil, this is just more of a seasoning. You know, these squash don't really have a lot to them, so the olive oil just adds a little bit of oomph. And now we're also gonna do the same thing, olive oil right on the chicken. That's gonna add tons of flavor, gonna add a little bit of richness. Same with salt, it brings out the flavor, brings out a little sweetness in the squash. They're not overly sweet. They're very, I think surprisingly for a lot of people, neutral flavored, but in a good way. They're not a bad flavor, they just really can pick up delicious flavors, and I think that's what's really great about it all. So pepper too, and this is again just a way to season them ahead of time. You know, whenever you're cooking, whenever you're roasting, anything in the kitchen, if you can season at different layers, the end result will be a well-seasoned dish, and usually in the end you use less salt if you do little bits throughout than at the very end. So now I just wanna flip these over. That way they kind of steam as they roast on the inside, which is kind of the magic trick here. So just turn those over. They look like nothing now, but when they're done, we're gonna scrape them all out. I'll put these in, I'll pull the chicken out when it's finished so it doesn't over roast, and we'll be good to go. The squash have roasted. The chicken were done before the squash were, so I took them out when they got to temperature. The squash, you can usually just tell when it gets really dark on top, but also it becomes super soft and it's just scoopable. So we're letting it, you know, just cool off enough that we'll scoop this all out in a little bit. But now we have the components to really make this, I like to think of it as a vegetable forward dish. Since we're going the route of not having noodles, I really like to make everything else sing. So we're gonna start with some zucchini, which always pick a zucchini that is small enough that you don't mind using the seeds. You know, if you ever grow zucchini in the summer, which I do, and you forget a zucchini for just like, it seems like an hour, or you know, one day before, and you should have picked it, you end up having this massive zucchini and the seeds in the center, you don't want to eat them, so you just scoop them out. But this time of year in the grocery store, usually during the winter, you find ones that are perfect for this. Now what I'm doing is I want to brown the zucchini. Zucchini can get kind of limp, kind of mushy. I don't like that, but what I want to do is brown it in some oil. And the key to that, and I've talked about this before, but the key to that is hot oil, but also no salt. What salt does here in this case, so if I would just salt this right now, it would pull out even more moisture. So instead, we don't want to do that. We want to put this into hot oil so it just starts sizzling right away, but no salt. Salt would inhibit that and it would more make it steam and get mushy. I want it to get a nice brown crust on it, so that's why I'm laying these out. Just in the end, it will give more flavor, give more texture to the dish. You hear that little bit of sear as I add them. That's exactly what you want. I'm gonna finish adding them all. We'll flip them once to make sure they get nice and browned on both sides, and we'll move on. The zucchini is now browning on the second side, so I wanna get ready the next steps, which will be some onion, some pepper. So the pepper adds obviously some sweetness. If you follow me, you may happen to know that I'm not a huge fan usually of bell pepper, but there are certain instances where it does make sense, and this is one of them. A little bit of that kind of just sweet pepper, none of the heat from pepper, and that's what we need here. So I'm gonna just chop it up in somewhat easily some planks just to give it a little bit more of an even dice. That to me is what we're trying to do here is we have onion that will be somewhat evenly diced, which you can see, but then if you can do the same with the pepper, it just makes so it cooks and sautés more evenly too. And then what's nice is once you get the whole dish ready, it becomes, you know, a little bit more, I think, pleasant to eat when things are diced somewhat similar, because your textures are gonna be somewhat just, you know, similar too, and that kind of is important. So doing these steps of making sure that things are even and diced, that's important. Now, I'm not gonna throw these out. I dice those up too, even though they're not the perfect plank. I don't throw out those pieces. I think we oftentimes see a pepper cut like that and think, well, what about those pieces? I cut them up. You could eat them too, or you could just eat them fresh, but I think why not just dice them up? So what we have over here, you can see now, is some nicely browned zucchini. So I browned it on the one side, I flipped it over. Now, if we would have added salt, I'm just checking my second side here. If we would have added salt, it wouldn't have browned like this. We want it to maintain this slightly brown, almost crisp exterior. Super important. So that's why we do it without salt. It sounds kind of odd, but if you would just now add salt, salt draws out moisture. So even if you just want this as a side dish, salt it afterwards. What I am gonna do though is pull out now this browned zucchini, because we wanna preserve that texture, preserve that flavor that's on it. But what we're also gonna do is use the same oil. So we have oil in here from doing the zucchini, and I wanna use that same thing here, and we're gonna add all of the onion and the pepper right to it. So it's really a one skillet cook here, which is I think important to note. We're not just cooking tons of bowls and tons of issues. We're doing it all in one skillet. So we're gonna add the pepper and the onion. We're gonna let that saute. And at this point we can add salt because I want to season now as we go. So we're gonna add some salt, let those saute down and keep working. I'm just going through and slicing some cherry or grape tomatoes in half. These are great because even out of season in the winter, they're gonna have a little sweetness to them and a lot better flavor than a larger tomato would. So that's why we use these at different times of the year. And then I have some garlic that I've chopped up. You can see I've just chopped it, and it's quite a bit because we want the flavor. So we're gonna add the garlic right in there with the tomatoes, and we're gonna take them over, and you're gonna see this beautiful sauteed peppers and onions. So you can see they've really started wilting down. Just kind of stir them around every so often. And they're really kind of taking on the color of those peppers. You're getting some nice brown bits on them. So this is when we want to add the garlic because we don't want it to burn, and those cherry tomatoes. And what I want them to do is just start to saute and break down just slightly. I want them to obviously stay cherry tomatoes, but I want them just to kind of burst and break down. With that, we're going to add a little bit of black pepper, a little bit of red pepper flakes, and some Italian seasoning. Just like the Italian seasoning you keep in the pantry. Maybe you use it on pizza, maybe you use it on other things. It's a mix that's already done. And what's great about that is it has all those different seasonings in it and herbs. And so it just kind of works together to instantly bring on that flavor. With this, I'm gonna add a little bit of chicken stock. This is just gonna help it kind of cook a little bit. Gonna help it create almost just like a thin sauce almost. So we're gonna let this simmer. Then we're gonna break down and kind of scoop out those squash and make a casserole. So the tomato mixture has been simmering away, and it doesn't look that much different other than the tomatoes are starting to get softened. And there's a little bit of liquid in it, and that's what we want. We want that little bit of liquid. That's gonna kind of help bring everything together. So what I've been doing is scraping out my spaghetti squash, which is really simple at this point. Now that they're baked, you can just take a spoon in there, go around, and you just pull out all of that flesh. It falls right into the bowl. And then most likely what you'll need to do a little bit, which you can see it's starting to come already into noodle-like, shapes, but I like to go in and break it up. Whether with your hand, you can kind of just squeeze it apart and it creates those noodles. See how that works? It's super simple. It's kind of just a beautiful thing. Yes, some people use this as like a health food. I think all food should be considered healthy, depending how you're eating it and how you're enjoying it. This is one of a great way to enjoy some great flavors. Don't view it like a health dish. View it like a delicious dish that you just want to enjoy. So now we can just put everything together, and that's really the fun part here. We have our chicken. You can either shred it or slice it up once it cools. Put it right in there with those noodles, if you will. Some peas that were frozen and I thawed. It's just a great way to add some green, add some more flavor. We have the zucchini, of course. Put that right in with any of that residual oil. And what's great now about this point is it's gonna soak in those juices of that chicken stock and the burst tomatoes and everything that's in here. It's just going to just bring that all together. And that's exactly what we want. So just slightly stir it and look what's happening. Those tomatoes, you can see how they were softening just enough. So they're becoming like this beautiful melting sauce. It's not like a tomato sauce by any means, but it's just enough that it really brings it together, and that's what I love here. So as you stir it, the noodles break up even more, and then we'll just put it right here into our baking dish. So I'm just putting this all right into a casserole dish. That's all it is. So, you know, some people like to stuff spaghetti squash itself. I have this thing where I don't really like stuffed zucchini, stuffed spaghetti squash, stuffed acorn squash. I just think proportion-wise, it doesn't really make sense. And if you put it into more of a casserole form, I think it much more makes sense to be able to enjoy it and eat it. And that's kind of what you want. So this is the idea of stuffing an acorn squash or making a sauce for a type of the squash, but doing it in a casserole form. So once it's all in there, we're gonna top it with some mozzarella cheese, because this is what's gonna just melt into all those crevices. It's gonna create a nice just topping for it with tons of flavor. But then to season that cheese further, what I always like to do is put a little bit of parm on it too. So a little bit of fresh parm. And what that does is almost act like a seasoning. It has a little bit of saltiness to it, has that flavor in it, kind of that funkiness that Parmesan does, which is really, to me, a special thing. And it's just gonna work well with that chicken and all these flavors in here. So put that right on. We're gonna put this right into an oven, let it get melting and bubbly and hot throughout. That's really all we need to do at this point. Everything's cooked, but we just want it bubbling throughout so it's nice and hot. So this baked, and you can see the cheese got nice and bubbly. At the end, I always like to put the broiler on for just like a minute, just to make sure it gets nice and browned on top. I just think that's pretty. But then you can just serve it up. So what's great about this is, think of all the heartiness that's in this. We have chicken, we have that squash, which is like this great filler. Look at that cheese. Do you see the cheese? Cheese pull always is a winner. And then you have all these beautiful vegetables. It's not a heavy dish. That's what's nice too. It doesn't have a thick, heavy, creamy sauce. It's just a nice component to have, especially during the winter, because it has cozy vibes, yet not just heavy. You get lots of flavors and textures, which I really like. The peas are really nice because they have these little pops of sweetness. The pepper, the bell pepper really comes through. You get that wonderful zucchini. The chicken is hearty, and then the cheese on top is kind of that richness that finishes it off. That squash is just like the undertone to the whole thing that to me is really a great combiner and a great equalizer in the whole dish. I really love it. And what do I hope you do with this? I hope you make something that maybe you haven't made before. Try some foods, enjoy something delicious, hearty, but also nutritious here during the winter months when we could really use it. So share this video around so other people can see that good food is possible and easy to make at home. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Check my website, wiseguy.com, for this recipe and all my other recipes. They're all on the website and there for you to enjoy.